We weren't supposed to find anything. That was the whole point of the mission. A routine sweep, an easy checkmark in the long list of exploratory failures. But then the signal came through. A single pulsing transmission from a planet that should have been lifeless. No atmosphere, no magnetic field, nothing but a barren rock drifting through the void. And yet, something out there was calling. NASA wasn't eager to make a big deal out of it, at least not publicly. They kept it quiet, treating it like background noise, a simple anomaly. But the thing about anomalies is they don't go away on their own. This one kept repeating, steady, unwavering. It was artificial, deliberate. Somebody or something had sent it. That's why they sent us. A crew of 6, hand-picked for what was supposed to be a straightforward investigation. The official directive was clear. Locate the source, analyze, report back. That was it. In and out, no risks, no assumptions. But standing there in the dim glow of the control room, listening to that slow, rhythmic pulse echo through the ship's speakers, I felt something deep in my gut. A pressure, a weight. Like whatever was waiting for us wasn't supposed to be found. We arrived at the planet's orbit 3 days later. Scanners swept across the surface, confirming what NASA already knew. No water, no vegetation, just endless dust and jagged rock formations stretching for miles. The signal, however, was stronger than ever. It was coming from beneath the surface. That's when things started to go wrong. The first problem was the landing. It should have been easy, textbook. But as soon as we breached the upper atmosphere, the ship's stabilizers started glitching. Warnings flashed across our HUDs, systems flickered on and off, and for a moment, it felt like the planet itself was pushing back. No storms, no atmospheric disturbances, just a sudden and inexplicable resistance against our descent. We managed to touch down in a jagged canyon near the signal's origin. The terrain was unnatural, too smooth in some places, too jagged in others, like something had shaped it. We ran scans, but the data didn't make sense. The planet had no tectonic activity, no weather systems, no history of geological shifts, and yet the formations looked recent, like they had been made. The air outside was thin, barely measurable. We suited up, checked our comms, and stepped onto the surface. The silence was suffocating. No wind, no shifting dust, just the crunch of our boots against the rock. The sky above was a void, darker than it should have been, even with the distant light of a nearby star. We followed the coordinates to the source of the signal, a deep fissure in the rock. It wasn't a cave, it wasn't a crater, it was a hole, a perfect vertical tunnel descending straight into the planet's surface. The walls were smooth, impossibly so, like they had been cut by a machine far beyond anything we had. The signal was coming from deep inside. I remember looking at the others, waiting for someone to suggest turning back. But no one did. Orders were orders, and we had a mission. So one by one, we descended. And that's when we lost contact with the ship. At first we thought it was just interference. The rock formations could have been disrupting our signal, or maybe our suits needed recalibration. But as we rappelled deeper into the tunnel, the static in our comms turned into something else. A low, humming distortion. Not random, not chaotic, rhythmic. Almost like breathing. The tunnel walls were cold, too cold. Our suits' thermal readings didn't match what they should have been. The deeper we went, the more unnatural it felt. It wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a passage, a constructed space. And then we hit the bottom. The ground beneath our boots was smooth, polished like black glass. The light from our helmets barely reflected off the surface. There was no dust, no debris, nothing natural. Just an endless dark chamber stretching out in all directions. And in the center, embedded in the floor, was the source of the signal. It wasn't a beacon. It wasn't a transmitter. It was something else. A structure, metallic but organic, pulsing with a faint, sickly glow. It was humming, vibrating at a frequency just low enough to feel in our bones. Every few seconds, it would send out that same repeating pulse, the one NASA had picked up, the one that had brought us here. Commander Harris stepped forward, reaching out with a gloved hand. The moment his fingers brushed against it, the pulse stopped, and the darkness around us moved. At first, we thought it was just a trick of the light. Our helmet beams flickered against the dark walls, and for a split second, it looked like the shadows had shifted. But then I saw it again, something pulling away from the edges of the chamber, peeling itself from the walls like liquid smoke. Harris yanked his hand back, stumbling away from the structure. "Did you see that?" His voice crackled through the comms, but there was something wrong with the signal. His words were delayed, stretching, warping like an echo in slow motion. I turned to the others. Morales, Patel, Cho. They all stood frozen, their helmet lights bouncing off the strange, shifting dark. It wasn't just moving, it was aware. The pulse returned, but this time, it wasn't coming from the structure in the floor. It was coming from everywhere, the walls, the ground, the air itself. A deep, resonant vibration that settled in my chest, making it harder to breathe. And then, the noise in our comms changed. No more static, no more distortion. Just voices, not ours. They were faint, whispering in a language I didn't recognize, but the tone, God, the tone, it wasn't human. It was layered, overlapping, as if multiple beings were speaking at once. Some fast, some slow, some impossibly deep, others sharp and chittering. It crawled into my head, burrowing into my skull like a pressure I couldn't shake. And then the lights cut out. Total blackness. I heard someone scream. Then the comms went dead, and when my helmet lights flickered back on, Harris was gone. I spun around, my breath coming in sharp gasps inside my helmet. "Harris!" My voice echoed uselessly in the vast chamber. No response, no sound. Just the pulse, now slower, heavier, like a heartbeat vibrating through the floor. Morales was the first to move, swinging her rifle's flashlight toward where Harris had been. There was nothing, no footprints, no disturbed dust, just empty space. He hadn't run, he hadn't fallen. It was like he had been erased. Cho's voice came through the comms, tight with panic. What the hell just happened? Where did he go? No one had an answer. I could hear Patel breathing hard, muttering something under his breath. The whispers in the darkness hadn't stopped. If anything, they were closer now, pressing in from all sides, shifting between languages that didn't exist. And then, the chamber changed. It wasn't immediate, not like a door opening or a wall shifting. It was subtler, more insidious. The space around us no longer felt static. The walls, if there were walls at all, seemed to stretch and breathe. The shadows weren't just moving, they were watching. "We need to go," Morales said. Her voice was shaking, but she kept her weapon raised. "Now." Patel was already backing up toward the ropes. "We have to get back to the ship, report this." I wanted to agree. Every part of me screamed to turn and run, to get the hell out of that pit. But something kept me rooted in place, because I had heard something else, not a whisper, not a voice, a footstep, not ours, slow, deliberate, right behind me. I turned, fast. My helmet light cut through the dark, scanning the empty space behind us. Nothing. But the second I looked away, the whispering stopped, and something breathed against the side of my helmet. I didn't scream. I wanted to, but my throat locked up. Every nerve in my body told me to run, to climb back up the ropes and never look back, but I couldn't move. Not yet. The breath against my helmet wasn't warm, it wasn't cold, it was wrong. Like the air itself had shifted, becoming something heavier, something that wasn't supposed to exist. Then Morales shoved me. Hard. "Move!" she snapped, her flashlight sweeping over my shoulder. I stumbled back, turned. Nothing was there. But the whispering had stopped. The pulse had stopped. And then we heard Harris. At first it was just a faint voice crackling through the comms, barely audible. Then it came through clearer, distorted, stretched in ways a human voice shouldn't be. "Help! Me!" It didn't sound like Harris, not entirely. It was close, but something was off. The tone, the cadence, it was like someone was trying to imitate him and failing. "Where are you?" Cho demanded, spinning in place, his breathing ragged. Silence. Then another sound, a scraping noise like metal against stone. Slow, steady, coming from deeper in the chamber. The darkness ahead of us shifted, parting just enough for our lights to catch movement. A shape. A silhouette. Harris. Or at least, something that looked like him. He stood at the edge of the light, his suit intact, his helmet reflecting our beams, but he wasn't moving. Not really. His limbs were too rigid, his stance too unnatural. Then he tilted his head. Slowly. Too slowly. The motion was almost mechanical, deliberate in a way that sent ice down my spine. "Harris?" Morales whispered. And then he took a step forward. His foot didn't make a sound when it touched the ground. That's when I knew that wasn't Harris. My fingers tightened around my rifle, but I didn't lift it. Not yet. My mind was screaming at me to run, to move, to do anything but stand there staring at the thing wearing Harris's suit. Because that's what it was. A thing. The longer I looked, the more I noticed. The way his body shifted, just slightly, just wrong. His suit was intact, undamaged, but the shape inside it wasn't right. His arms were too long, his torso too stiff, and when he took another step, his knee bent at an unnatural angle before correcting itself, as if whatever was inside was still figuring out how to move. "Harris, say something," Patel whispered. His voice cracked. The thing hesitated. Then, in that same distorted, stretched-out voice, it spoke. "Help! Me!" But it didn't sound like a plea. It sounded like a recording, like someone had taken Harris's voice and twisted it, replaying it at the wrong speed. The words stretched, lagged, and beneath them something else leaked through, a faint clicking sound like distant chittering. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then it took another step. Faster this time, Morales raised her rifle. "Don't come any closer." The thing stopped, tilted its head again. Then, the comms exploded with noise, not static, not distortion. Voices, hundreds of them. Some whispering, some screaming, some laughing in that horrible, layered way that crawled under my skin. They weren't speaking any language I knew, but I understood the intent. They were mocking us. Then the lights flickered. The thing in Harris's suit twitched. Just a quick, jerky motion like something inside had seized up. And then it charged. It didn't run. It lunged. I didn't think. I fired. The gunshot echoed through the chamber, the impact slamming into its chest. It should have dropped. It didn't. Instead it stopped, twitched again, then kept coming. Patel screamed. Morales fired. Cho was already running. I turned to follow, but just before I did, my light caught something else in the darkness behind the thing wearing Harris's face. More shapes, more figures, all standing, all watching, and all of them were wearing NASA suits. I ran. I didn't think, didn't breathe, just ran. The pounding of my boots against the slick, glass-like floor barely registered over the chaos in my comms. Morales was shouting, Patel was sobbing, and Cho was ahead of us, moving fast, scrambling for the ropes. Behind us, the thing that had been Harris moved unnaturally fast, not running, not sprinting, just closing the distance. Its movements were erratic, like a marionette being yanked forward by invisible strings. And behind it, in the shifting dark, the other figures began to move. The ones in NASA suits. The ones that should not have been here. I don't know how many there were. Dozens? Hundreds? All standing just outside the reach of our lights, their helmets reflecting our beams but showing no faces. Just voids where their heads should have been, and they were following us. The ground beneath my feet trembled, pulsing in time with that horrible rhythmic signal. The walls of the chamber, the ones that had seemed so solid before, now twisted, expanded, contracted, as if the planet itself was breathing. "We're almost there!" Cho shouted ahead of me. "Keep moving!" The ropes. We just had to get to the ropes, climb back up, get to the ship, get out. But then Patel screamed. I turned just in time to see him collapse, his leg caught. No, held. Something black and amorphous had slithered up from the floor.
wrapping around his ankle like a living shadow. He thrashed, clawing at the rock, but it was dragging him back, toward the things in the dark. "Help me! Help me!" Morales skidded to a stop, gripping his arms and trying to pull him free. I grabbed his other arm, yanking with everything I had. But the thing holding him, it wasn't letting go. It was pulling harder, stronger. Patel screamed again, short, sharp, then suddenly stopped. We were still holding his arms, but the rest of him was gone, ripped away, swallowed by the dark. No blood, no body, just gone. Morales made a choked sound, half a sob, half a gasp, but there was no time to mourn. The figures were still coming, moving toward us in silent, jerky strides. Cho was already at the ropes, scrambling up. "Come on, now!" Morales and I ran, reaching the ropes as something in the darkness lunged. I felt it graze my boot, a cold, wet pressure like fingers made of mist. Then I grabbed the rope and climbed, hand over hand, faster than I ever had in my life. Below me, Morales was right behind, her face pale inside her helmet. She wasn't looking up, she was looking down, and so I did too. That was a mistake, because the figures weren't staying at the bottom, they were climbing after us. I climbed faster. My arms burned, my gloves slick with sweat, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Below me, Morales was moving just as fast, her breath coming in sharp gasps over the comms, but the things were gaining. They didn't climb the way we did. They didn't need ropes. They moved up the walls, up the empty air, their bodies twisting and bending in ways that made my stomach turn. Their movements were jerky, erratic, wrong. Like they weren't meant to exist in a space like this, but they were forcing themselves to. And then the whispers started again. Not from below, from inside my helmet. Soft at first, slithering through my ears like tendrils of sound, wrapping around my thoughts. They weren't speaking English, but somehow I understood. Stay. You were never meant to leave. You belong to us now. I clenched my teeth, shaking my head, trying to push them out. But they weren't just voices. They were memories. Flashes of places I'd never been. A planet covered in shadows, writhing with unseen shapes. A sky split open, leaking darkness like blood. And a feeling, no, a certainty, that this place, this thing beneath the surface, wasn't dead. It had never been dead. It had just been waiting. Morales screamed. I risked a glance down. One of the things had reached her, a hand, if you could call it that, gripping her ankle. It wasn't a solid shape, more like a shifting smear of black, fingers melting and reforming, trying to pull her back down. "No! No!" She kicked, twisted, tried to shake it off. It didn't let go. "Morales, hold on." I reached down, but it was too late. She looked up at me, her eyes wide behind her visor, and then she was yanked downward, hard. She didn't even have time to scream. 1 second she was there, the next, the darkness swallowed her whole. And then she was gone. Just like Patel, just like Harris. I climbed faster, my breath ragged, my muscles screaming. The tunnel exit was close, so close. Cho was already up there, reaching down, yelling my name. "Grab my hand! Come on!" I stretched, fingers straining. And then something grabbed me, cold, wet, seeping through my suit like ink, the same shifting amorphous limbs wrapping around my ankle. No, no, I kicked. I thrashed. It held tight. Then for the first time, the thing spoke to me. Not in whispers, not in echoes, directly. "You cannot leave." And then the tunnel collapsed.
Everything happened at once. A deafening roar shook the tunnel, a sound so deep it rattled my bones. The walls, if they had ever been walls, shuddered, cracked, and then gave way, collapsing into a rushing tide of darkness. Not rock, not dust, something else, something alive. I felt myself being dragged down, the thing on my ankle pulling harder, yanking me back toward the void. I clawed at the rope, my gloves slipping, my breath coming in ragged gasps inside my helmet. Above me, Cho was screaming, "No, no, no, no." I didn't want to die. Not here. Not in this place. I used every ounce of strength left in my body, twisted hard, and kicked. My boot connected with something solid, just for a second, and the grip loosened. I wrenched my leg free and lunged for Cho's outstretched hand. Fingers closed around my wrist. He pulled. The darkness below me shrieked, a chorus of voices, enraged, furious, echoing through the collapsing tunnel. You were never meant to leave. You belong to us. The last thing I saw before we breached the surface was them, all of them, dozens, no, hundreds, of figures standing motionless in the swirling black below. NASA suits, other uniforms I didn't recognize, their visors reflecting my own terrified face back at me, and at the very center of them all, Harris. He lifted his hand, as if reaching for me, as if saying goodbye. Then the light of the surface swallowed me, and I was falling, crashing onto the cold, hard ground outside the tunnel. Silence. Nothing but the sound of my own gasping breath. Cho was next to me, staring at the collapsed tunnel, his chest rising and falling in panicked heaves. We were the only ones left, Morales, Patel, Harris, gone. The signal was gone too. No more pulsing sound, no more whispers, just empty static, and then our ship's comms crackled to life. Commander Harris, do you copy? Cho and I locked eyes. The voice on the other end was clear, unbroken. It was Harris. We never told NASA the full truth. The official report blamed an unstable tunnel structure, an uncharted cavern collapse. We were debriefed, analyzed, tested, then sent home. But the signal came back, weeks later, the same pulse, the same rhythm, like something down there was still waiting, still calling. And sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I hear it. A voice, Harris's voice. You were never meant to leave.